2008. This is Ken Schoen with the Jewish Historical Society of Western Massachusetts. The pleasure of interviewing Leonard and Edith Ehrlich at their home in Amherst, Massachusetts. We're going to be talking about their lives and their interests and what's happening today. So I'd like to start with either of you who would like to start talking about what brought you up to Western Massachusetts and what it was like in terms of Jewish life and Jewish studies, and I'd like to hear that story.
All right. We were students, graduate students at Yale University from 1954 to 1956. And at that time, I had passed my preliminary exam in 1956, and Edith gave birth to our first child that spring, and we were very strapped for money. Fortunately, on September 1st, when the other graduate students came back for study, at that time I was waiting to see the dean of the graduate school to see whether I can get more money. And one of the other students came there and said, "Hey, Leonard, here is a job you might be interested in." She was a candidate at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, but she was not able to take the job at that time. And I said, okay. I called up Professor Shute. He said, why don't you come here 2 days from now on Friday, and let's take a look at you. We did, and right there and then they hired me.
What was your particular interest or studies in graduate school, and what was the position that you were being hired for?
I was hired. We were graduate students of philosophy at the University of Massachusetts, at Yale University. And they needed a third person for their philosophy department here. At that time, the University of Massachusetts had about 4,500 students. And it was about 8 years after they changed over from being a Mass Aggie to being a college and a university they were in the process of really expanding. Within 10 or 15 years, we jumped from 4,500 students to 24,000 students. At any rate, they hired me right there and then. I had never stood before a classroom before, and within 10 days I was supposed to come up here to start teaching. It was just a mind-boggling thing. We came up here, we were very poor, and in time we found that there were other Jewish faculty members here, and there was even a Jewish community in Northampton. They had a synagogue there in a building that was formerly a congregational church. And about 10 or 15 years later, they started building the community that is now there, and they recently expanded but as I said, there was no Jewish community in Amherst. They got themselves Professor Shemetsky, a young man, to start the Massachusetts Review. He was Jewish, and at Amherst College, the English department, he told the story of how some people in the English department at Amherst College, sneered at the fact that they have a Professor Shemetsky as editor of English journal, English literature journal. That was the attitude. It wasn't until about the second half of the 1960s that some faculty members or some faculty member wives decided to have a Hebrew school for all the kids that these new faculty members had. And that's how it started. Later, about 1968-69, they started talking about founding a Jewish community in Amherst. And in time, that's what happened. And they bought a building of a formerly Congregational church in Amherst, and they're still there.
Who were the other Jewish professors who were here in the beginning? I think you said you came in the 50s, right?
I came in 1956.
Right. So who else was here, and how were you received by the community at UMass in terms of being Jewish? But what other professors were here in the 50s and 60s?
My being Jewish, that was not mentioned. Although it became known amongst the faculty and even amongst the students. I remember in my second semester here, a student, a 20-year-old student, came up to me very excitedly to find that someone was a refugee, the way his father was, and so on and so forth. Those are trivial things, you see, but it was not really a reception of my being Jewish.
Were there other refugee scholars who came to UMass besides yourself? Any exiles or refugees?
In time.
How about Henry? Eva Schiffer came at the same time. Henry Lee.
That's right.
The German part.
And Brownthal, right? Brownthal?
Jerry Brownthal.
Jerry Brownthal.
Henry Lee was there, who, as you perhaps might know, was one of the interpreters at the Nuremberg trial.
Right.
And Brownthal was
Jerry,
there. Brown.
And Lisa was there. Lisa Train.
Lisa Train. Lisa Welt Train. Her name then was.
Eva Schiffer. Then
but we were
Peter
a community of refugees.
Peter Heller. Well, the German department was full of them. Let's phrase it that way. But no, not much otherwise. In the English department there were some Jews, but not
the
refugees.
English department. No, the wife of one of the young professors then was a refugee. But as I said, there weren't
a handful.
Yeah.
You came to teach philosophy, and Edith, did you come to teach also at that point, or were you raising your children?
Well, I was in a way doing both. I had to leave Yale because I needed one more course to finish my course requirement, and since we were moving up here, they decided to kick me out. They said, I don't have a residence, I need to be in residence, and even though I traveled back and forth to attend that particular course, they kicked me out. I was told years later by the chairman that it was because I was a woman. He came out and said so.
What department were you studying in? What were you
Philosophy.
What were you working on at that point?
At that point, I was finished my course requirement and ready to start studying for my exams, for my comprehensive exams. And I said, sorry. In time, they allowed me to finish a master's degree. They told me that I had 6 weeks to write a master's thesis, which I did, even though I had 2 small children, a household, and I was teaching for the German department. I finished it. I never heard any more until I got a call from the Hampshire Gazette saying, could they come and take a picture of me? And I said, well, why would you want to do that? She said, because you're getting a master's from Yale. I said, thank you for telling me. And that's the only way I knew.
So Yale's attitude toward women scholars was not exactly progressive
in
the 50s?
No, not at all. Not at all. And in time, when the German department got a doctoral program, I joined the doctoral program here. But by then, things had gotten different in the German department. Most of the refugees had left, and a lot of Germans were brought in. I mean, Germany.
From Germany.
From Germany.
And what happened as a result of that? This is a story I know you want to tell.
It's a story that is very, very long and very, very painful.
But it's important to tell it.
They tried everything to get rid of me. They spread stories that one can't work with me, that I was unable to do the work, and so on and so forth. When I took my exams, my comprehensives, they said we would be dealing with the 20th century in this particular exam. They put in stuff from the 19th to confuse me. They did just about everything they could, but I did very, very well. They just couldn't get rid of me. And then they couldn't find anyone to direct a dissertation. It took me years to find somebody. And I was lucky enough that they finally gave me Henry Lee, who was at the bottom of the totem pole in the German department, completely without reason, and because he was a wonderful teacher and a very brilliant man. So I just got in under the wire with my dissertation.
What did you write? What did you do your writing on?
I wrote on Nietzsche, because I had studied philosophy, that was my field, and I took the German department because that's what was available at the time.
As you look back, what is your understanding of why they were so difficult with you and did this to you? What is your understanding now?
There are a number of reasons. I was Jewish, I was middle-aged, and they didn't like women. These were people that were brought...
You also were Austrian, Viennese.
Yeah, and that was against me too, because they brought in a whole bunch of people from Germany. One of them, a former SS man. I won't mention any names, but he had the SS mark under his arm. He cheated to get into the country. And other Germans whose only qualification was that they spoke German. They didn't know what to do with the students or anything. And that's the way it was.
At that time, there was no association to defend you or look after your rights?
I was... the ACLU wanted to make a class action suit. But I was so heartsick, and I was not well. I had what it was known as a refugee's disease, but that's something else. I just couldn't face it. I knew that I could never go back into that department. I said, just forget about it. And that was the end of my teaching career.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So that's the way it was.
Whatever happened to all these professors, these German professors? They all stayed there and finished out their career?
They all stayed there. Oh, yeah. Some are still there.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Actually, they retired.
There's some retired, and a couple are still there, I know.
But this story was known in the 50s or 60s, what you went through. This was public knowledge.
No, nobody knew about it.
Oh.
Yeah.
When you say refugees to sickness, what is that? I haven't heard that
you haven't
term
heard
used.
that before. Okay. I have what is known... This is a physical thing. I don't know whether I should talk about it on camera, but what they call irritable bowel syndrome.
Uh-huh.
And it really came to the fore in the 60s when we happened to have a sabbatical and we were in Basel. And I went to a internist who was a top-notch man, a Jew, Bernstein, his name was, wasn't it? Bernstein. Yeah. He, in fact, he was so good that Theodor Heuss from Germany used to come down to Basel to consult with him. He also, Karl Jaspers recommended him to us. And he examined, he says, "You've got the refugee sickness, I see it all the time."
Why did he call it that? What?
Because this is to a great extent psychological and has to do with post-traumatic stress. This whole situation made me very ill in the situation in the German department, and I just couldn't face any more of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I simply gave up. And of course, the unwritten law in the valley is if you're let go in one department, they won't take you in another.
And here you had a husband who was teaching in philosophy.
And that was against me too, because they claimed that's nepotism. However, they hired in the German department people who were married to each other. But they said because Leonard is in philosophy and I'm in German, but it's nepotism, they can't give me tenure. Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear this story, but it's history. What happened here is important.
Yeah, I've never talked about it to anyone, especially not publicly.
But it's important.
Yeah.
It's important to recognize what it was like.
It was very, very bad.
How did... So you no longer taught at this college? That
No,
was okay.
I taught at Mount Holyoke. I taught for a couple of semesters, some extra courses.
It must have been very frustrating to have this knowledge and ability and not be able to transmit it.
Totally devastated me. I also never thought that I never thought I would teach. And the then chairman, Fritz Ehlert, who is an Ehlert from this area, he was a wonderful man. Very, very, very nice man and very knowledgeable. And he said one day, he said, "Edith, I've got 2 extra sections." This was when everything was burgeoning. He said, "Why don't you take them?" I said, "Sure." From one day to the next. And I walked into the class and I knew this was it. I had such a rapport with the students. And there seemed to be such a connection between us. And they really, really learned from me and they liked me. And students that I flunked would want to come back into my section. I said, "Why don't you go to somebody else?" "No, we want to be with you." So the others were jealous, these people, especially from Germany, who knew nothing about teaching. All the kids wanted to get out of their sections and into mine, and I tried to keep them out. And I couldn't. This sounds very self-serving. This is one reason I never talk about it, but that's the way it was. And I felt this was going to be my life, this teaching. And to this day, when I speak to a group, I feel very good. I'm never afraid. I have this connection somehow to people as I speak with them. And this was just cut short. With no reason. It was very traumatic for me, very traumatic.
Yeah.
It's to this day. It took me 10 years
I can
before
feel
I
it.
would go
I
on
can
the
feel
campus
it today. I can feel it today. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
It's been a long
To have a
time.
gift, and not be able to
Yeah.
express it. Sure. So let me go back then, if it's okay.
Sure.
With
Enough of that.
well, so you're both philosophers. You're both interested in Jaspers and Nietzsche, and how did it evolve from teaching modern philosophy, shall we say, to Jewish studies? How did this Jewish Studies Department get started, and how did that evolve?
All right, let me tell you how it started in my case and in the case of the University of Massachusetts. It would have, I'm sure it would have started in some other way too, but my own experience had some, as it happened, my own experience had something to do with it. Something similar happened in the philosophy department when it grew very big as a graduate department. A certain development happened in Anglo-American philosophy in the 50s, in the 60s, and it was entirely different from and hostile to what I was doing. What I was doing was relegated to what's called continental philosophy, which is a misnomer because the philosophies that developed in the last few hundred years on the continent was related to what happened in Britain, you see, especially in Scotland. So you could talk about European philosophy, but no, it was Anglo-American analytic philosophy, which consists mainly of tearing arguments apart, you see. And there's nothing, from my perspective, you see, there's nothing substantive about it. At any rate, one of the courses that I taught was existential philosophy, for example, and that was extremely popular. So I was given this in order to increase the enrollment because one right. Okay, but I was kept down my development professionally, and my energies, you see, were neither wanted nor appreciated, and so I had the idea that we ought to have Jewish studies, okay?
You have to consider that you also taught philosophy of the Holocaust.
I taught philosophical problems of the Holocaust
yes.
before I knew that the topic of Holocaust was a topic, academic research topic.
What year was this approximately?
Oh, that was in the very early 60s.
Yeah.
I sprinkled things in already in the late 50s. But I made the specific problems, philosophical problems of the Holocaust for honors students, undergraduate honors students, starting in the early 60s. And I remember in 1965, we had doctoral students in philosophy, and one time a student, not a Jewish student, but a student said, "Why don't you teach a seminar on this, on this topic?" You see, this is the way it developed, and in those days, in the early 60s, books started coming out. Some very important books, Hilberg and Hannah Arendt and Elie Wiesel and so on and so forth. And these things, and others whom I'm not going to mention. The list is too long. And I used many of these books, and I saw the problems that are in some of these books. I mean, the real methodological problems and substantive problems.
Zum Beispiel.
It's very difficult. All right, I give you one example. From a set of papers that somehow made its way to YIVO in New York. It shows the problem of a certain organization in Vienna during the time of the deportations and so on. Hilberg has 5 pages in his book, in the first edition of his book, concerning the performance of 2 Judenräte in Vienna, namely Löwenherz and Murmelstein. And he goes so far as to call them collaborators, and so on and so forth. And what does he base himself on? He bases himself on these papers at YIVO. I knew Murmelstein when I was a child. I did not understand everything that he said in his sermons, but I understood one thing, namely there is something to understand, and this man is brilliant and utterly devoted to his Judaism. Okay, so all these things that were said in the rumors and that Hilberg took up supposedly on the basis of his evidence, you see, disturbed me. So we had these papers we went to YIVO, we looked at these papers, and we asked them to make us copies. They did. We have these copies. We studied them thoroughly, and the picture we got was entirely different from what Hilberg did. Namely, Hilberg, and we saw what he did. Namely, he took a passage from this paper, a passage from that paper, put them together and gave the semblance of his having researched, of having evidence, documentary evidence, for these false interpretations, you see. Okay, I gave this methodology a certain kind of term, namely cherry picking. Cherry picking. Take a little cherry and you get a bowl of you see. So at any rate, I saw the problems with Hannah Arendt too, and so on and so forth. Although she was like ourselves, a student of Jaspers, and we had met her, and she was favorably disposed toward us. But that's a separate story. Still, there are some things which are problematic there. We don't condemn her the way she's generally condemned. It's utterly unfair. But there are some problems there. Whatever. This set me, this set me that there is something to do in the area of proper philosophical study of the Holocaust, and that's how my courses on the Holocaust started, and this in part led to the necessity, to my realizing the necessity of having a Jewish studies program, a Judaic Studies program. There are, after all, 2,000 to 4,000 students who are Jewish from all over the state, you see, and something ought to be done. And I had the energy to do something like this, you see, since I could not expend this energy in my department, the philosophy department, you see. I gathered a group of fellow faculty members from various departments, especially Jules Pickus. I don't know whether you know who he was. But others too. Altogether, we were 12 rather steady persons, and I was their leader in arranging first a program in Judaic Studies, a major in Judaic Studies, and then a program that, see, those are special terms at the university, a program in Judaic Studies, and finally a department. In a parallel way, the one or two faculty members developed a Near Eastern program, and I saw to it that when the Department of Judaic Studies was set up, the Near Eastern Studies major should be raised to a program, and the two programs be together in a department of Judaic and Near Eastern Studies, and that's the way it has been since the time I established it in 1986. And as I said, I in time became a professor of both philosophy and a professor of Judaic Studies until my retirement. I was the first chair of the Department of Judaic and Eastern Studies until, well, for the first 4 years, if I remember correctly.
Who else was involved in this development of this program with you, this Jewish Studies? What other professors come to mind?
You want me to name some professors?
Bob Rothstein.
Bob Rothstein?
Bob Rothstein, who's still with it. And Henry Lee on German Jewish literature. Sigrid Bauschinger, also in German Jewish literature. What is
Was
it?
Lyman involved?
Of course, Wyman was involved. When I was on leave one time, he took over as acting chair. Yeah, he's a very close and good friend of ours. Let's see, in French, Boozy.
Oh,
Yeah.
Fred Boozy.
Yeah.
He's interested in Drummond, anti-Semitism in France. Drummond.
Yeah.
Some came in later.
How did the university respond to your proposing this idea of a program and a department, a major?
It took about 10 years.
Well, look, it was an extremely difficult thing. Many of us,
Murray Schwartz.
Murray
Myself,
Schwartz. Okay.
many of us, myself included, had at the beginning to do all these things on a voluntary basis. I'm not even saying on a shoestring. There was no money for it. Okay, the College of Humanities and Fine Arts was very happy to have that extra enrollment, so they granted us the scheduling of courses, you see, but there was no money. There was no money forthcoming. And some of our departments, mine included, philosophy department, for example, resented my spending time on this. One time, for several years, we had a very fine secretary who happened to be Jewish. She was told to tell me if I make requests about typing a letter or something like that having to do with Jewish studies, that is not on my job
Descriptions.
Huh?
You're not your job description, or it's not part of your
my
budget.
job description. Yeah, you see, and she said that regrettably, or regretfully, and in time we sought a more regular status, you see, so that the faculty is Judaic Studies faculty, and so that we can hire some people.
And what happened when you wanted that?
Well, it was very difficult. It was very difficult.
Why? Why?
Because the university expanded. You don't know what the state does to the university. There are times when they just throw money in, okay, and then times when they decide to save, and where do you cut first? Okay, I remember when, for example, when Governor King was here, he had absolutely no idea what a university was. You see,
but how does this connect to Jewish studies? How does this connect to your getting your department approved by UMass? Did they have no money?
We had a for about 2-3 years. We had a chancellor who was from a Christian family, but Jewish refugees. Okay, his name was Kofler, and I went to Kofler because I couldn't get any place with the dean of humanities.
Who was the dean of humanities?
The dean was Ellen.
Once again?
Jeremiah Ellen.
Okay.
He was dean for a very long time, when I first came to him about Jewish, Judaic studies, he was he was nonplussed. What's this about? I said, this is an academic field which predates the Western University. Okay. It goes back to ancient times as a research field and so on and so forth. In any case, I had to go to the provost or the chancellor Kofler. He heard me out and said, "There is no money for that." I was so shocked that after a moment I burst out saying, "There's money for all sorts of ethnic programs which sprang up only this decade, and there's no money for." And that must have shocked him no end. That must have shocked him no end. He resigned within a year or two to go to Arizona because that was a very heavy thing to club him over the head with. It wasn't long before there was support for what we were trying to do, namely to establish the field as a regular academic discipline.
Were there at the same time a Department of Black Studies or Hispanic Studies?
I don't want to name names.
This is your opportunity. This is a historical document. If you don't do it now, it's never going to happen.
It's all right. People can look it up. In any case, Hispanic studies, was there such a...
No,
there was,
no,
there was an interdisciplinary cooperative program.
Was there Black Studies?
Black studies.
Of course there were Black studies.
So your point was, we've got a Black Studies program, but no Jewish... Was that your comparative...
there were
point?
other ethnic programs. There were other ethnic programs too. In fact, when Ms. Portuguese came to me to ask me, how do I go about establishing women's studies? I gave her tips.
Were there any good arguments against establishing a Jewish studies program?
There's only one argument. no money.
Well, there was also one other argument, namely, this is a state institution and this is a religious program. They tried to turn it into a religious.
Yeah, there was
thing.
that. There was that too. There was that too. But
In fact, you spent a lot of time with
we told them that this is not a Jewish studies program. This is a Judaic studies program. Okay, it comprises cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary substance, history and literature,
language.
not only religious literature, but even religious literature is studied as literature rather than as indoctrination or religion indoctrination, and so on and so forth. There's music and art and so on and so forth.
What was your objective in setting up this independent program? What did you want to see ultimately happen? In terms of the students and the future of this, what did you want? What would be the
I wanted. Oh, by the way, we had Christian support for the establishing this. I remember at one crisis point when we were really running into a wall, you see. Father Drinan, who was a congressman at that time, came here to give a talk. And afterward, after the talk, I came up to him and told him about our problem. And I've been told that behind the scenes, he gave a very strong push to the university to help us out. And apparently it is just one example of Christians who support us better than Jewish organizations, okay? I don't want to go into that.
I said, why not? Why not?
Huh?
Why not? Shana to the Goyim, why not tell us the story? This is a story to be told. What happened with the Jewish organizations?
At one time, Julius Lester, I believe that was before he converted to Judaism, came to us. Came to me and asked that he be permitted to have a course in Judaic black relations. Okay. Others recommended this. Jewish speakers did, and the chaplain. For heaven's sakes, I knew him from the time that he came to us, and he, I believe, is still he's a member of our congregation in Northampton.
Oh, I know who you mean. Okay, it'll come to me too.
Yeah.
It'll come to me. Yeah.
And anyway, he recommended it too. So okay, yeah. Somehow the news reached the Brooklyn Jewish tabloid paper, whatever the name is, and one of the editors, a rabbi,
Kahane.
I don't think it was Kahane.
But he was the editor of that paper at one point.
Yeah, but someone, a editor, okay, wrote a scathing, hateful article about our program, about our program, and of course because of Julius Lister and so on. It was terrible. By that time, by the way, I was not. Yeah, I was still chairman, but we already had a department, and we already had Berkowitz, who is very observant, very orthodox. You see, in other words, we had
diversity,
a going concern. Yeah.
Yechiel Lander is the rabbi you're talking about.
Who?
Yechiel Lander.
No. Yechiel Lander is at Smith College. At Smith College.
He's not the chaplain you're talking about?
No.
Okay.
No. Which one? I don't know. Well.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it made controversy, and what happened then? Yeah. Was it controversial because of some things Julius Lester had said back in New York
about
WBAI
20 years earlier, about
the Jews?
20 years earlier.
That was what they brought up.
Yeah, that's what they brought up. You see, and he said in that editorial that. He predicted that these things will happen to those clandestine so-called Jewish studies programs and so on and so forth. You know, it was really a great put down.
And this made the news, big news?
In that paper.
Just in one paper?
Just in that one paper, okay. But still, look what New York says about Judaica and about the Jewish life, about the Jewish community, about, for that matter, the practice of Judaism and Jewish studies.
Okay, so what happened
in the United States?
Okay, so what happened?
What happened is that I called up Julius Lister. He was devastated, and he explained what the whole thing is about. I told him, I believe you. You just keep going and how you want to do. And I wrote a huge 4-page letter to the paper. Okay, challenging them to reprint my, to print it. Okay, naturally they never did. They disregarded it. They didn't acknowledge it, and so on and so forth. But it's on file, and
maybe not.
So there was a storm, but you overcame it. It was a storm.
Yes, but it reverberated.
How did it reverberate?
In a certain amount of mistrust. There was also a double race going on for money. At the same time, Hillel needed money to establish itself properly, and Judaica Studies was looking for money. And the money mostly went to Hillel because that was where Yiddishkeit was, and that's where you had Shabbat, and you had dinners and stuff like that. And this Judaica Studies was sort of disregarded as not important. It's just one of those little mishugas, that lie down. And so we didn't get money.
The administration then used this as a pretext, perhaps.
That's what we went to the Jewish communities, both in Springfield and in Holyoke. Went as far as Boston. We never got any support.
You went and said, we want to do Jewish studies, we need money, we need your help, money.
Yes. Yeah. And we did not get it. Did you go to speak just to the board of directors, or did you go speak to the individuals with money, to the board of directors? We wrote, we spoke, we visited. It was perfectly pointless.
This is what year approximately? 19...
You mean when
No, this period when you've got the controversy and you're looking for money.
to do money, get money.
Yeah, what year?
That was in the 80s.
In the 80s.
Yeah. Because the university said, we don't have the money, why don't you go outside? So we tried.
Uh-huh.
Not just we, but other people too who were involved in this. And we came back empty-handed.
So what did you do next?
Well, look,
People volunteered.
People volunteered. So what happened with Julius Lester? If you take a segue for a moment, take it aside. Were you still teaching when Julius became Jewish and then became part of Jewish studies?
Yeah,
Can you include that in what? How'd that all happen? How did he become part of Jewish studies? Wasn't there some controversy with the Afro-American Studies Department?
oh, well, for him there was.
Yeah.
For him there was. You see, he came out, so to say, with his Jewish background. I think it was an article in Moment magazine. We must have it someplace in the garage. And in that article, he sort of hinted that with his coming out that way, he's going to be in some kind of trouble with the African American community. So it was nonetheless, he considers himself to have 1 foot here, 1 foot there, even though they don't, in African American, they don't like that anymore. Still, he teaches African American and Judaica and Jewish relations, you see, and the history of this in the United States.
Ultimately, he left Afro-American studies and came to Jewish studies.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah.
I think that was the compromise they worked out.
Yeah.
He left.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jewish studies offered him a position that he could
Yes.
continue.
Interestingly, the most prestigious professor of philosophy left philosophy to become chair of African American studies.
And he's Jewish.
Who is Jewish, you know?
Who is this we're talking about?
Wolf. Robert Paul Wolf.
Oh, okay. When you conceived of Jewish studies back in the 70s, you had an idea what you wanted to see happen. As you look back now on how Jewish studies, I don't know if you've kept in touch with current thinking and teaching. If you look at it now and how it's evolved over the years, can you give me some impressions of where you saw it going, where it's gone, and where you see it going in the future? Is it something that's evolving, or is it just a course of studies, so to speak?
Well, I took a look at what developed in 2 states with relatively fewer Jewish populations, namely Ohio and Texas. And both of them developed departments that are not only teaching departments, but also very respectable research departments. And I hoped that we would be amongst the leading state-supported Judaic Studies departments as far as research is concerned, and as far as serving the student public through teaching is concerned. I also had a very distinct idea, not entirely original, but I pursued it very radically, namely that the department not only have what I called a core faculty for Judaic studies topics, you see, but that its faculty also include people from other departments. I call that cross-disciplinary, and not only interdisciplinary but cross-disciplinary. You see, a field, so that we can have really a total immersion in Judaica. And as I said, to bring this up to the level of research, and quality research, okay, not trivial research, but quality research. Unfortunately, one time, the last time I hired someone, or who was hired while I was still chair, very much failed us in that respect, and it was a very troublesome thing. But generally, I remember we were very successful. We were very successful in hiring top-notch people who can do research as well as teach in a very effective way, and teach masses of people, you see, masses of students. What happened after I left this chair? Well, again, we had trouble in 1994 when a provost who really didn't understand, an acting provost or interim provost she was called, who really didn't understand the academic departments, you see. She was from the education department, or the education school, which is not an academic research thing. She had no idea as to the nature of the College of Arts and Science, for example. And she wanted to, in the short time that she would be provost, to save money by consolidating departments, you see. And she was going to assign Judaica to I don't know, history or something like this, you see.
History.
What is it?
It's history.
To history. And again, I mean, it was so dangerous that they called me from the Judaica Studies Department, knowing that I had great experience in writing very effective letters to the right people. And I sent it to the Board of Trustees, to the governor, to all sorts of people. At that time, what's his name was president of the university. You know, that controversial figure.
Bulgers, Whitney Bulgers.
Yeah. And I got through some sort of grapevine in time that he was very much against the dissolution of Judaic states. See, these difficulties occur. At that time, what's his name was already chairman. The present one.
James Young.
Young.
And he somehow succeeded in getting positions to fill for the department. I am not thrilled about how he filled them. I'm not going to go into this.
Give me the philosophic. No, philosophically, what's wrong? Philosophically, I'm not asking names, but philosophically, what's wrong with that? What's happening?
One thing is stagnant somehow. Nothing,
Trivial
nothing
research.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing much
Trivial
is happening.
research. Trivial accomplishment, but there is an ambiguity there. The ambiguity between questionable substance and cadre of supporters. Never mind. I'm not going to go further
That's
into
fine.
this. Okay.
That's fine. That's
Okay.
fine. I would hope that you, as so to speak, an elder statesman in the field, both of you, are still consulted. You don't have to answer this. But I would hope that your expertise and knowledge, but I get a sense that that's not the case. So we'll let that be. Okay. A prophet is without glory in his own land. Yeah. So I want to change the subject to something that interests me a lot.
Okay.
You've both had tremendous experiences in your life. You've been through a lot. And what you've been through, a good piece of it is on account of your being Jewish. Your life experience, where you've been thrust back and forth here and there, has to do with your being Jewish. I would appreciate if you could talk a bit about how you see yourselves as Jewish. What does this mean to you when you think of being Jewish? Is it grounded in culture? Is it grounded in philosophy? Is it grounded in practice? Is it a belief system? Is there a God present? Where have you come to in your evolution now that you're elder statesmen and women, so to speak? I think people would like to know that.
How did you start?
He wants you to start, Edith. Go ahead. How would you define, when you think of yourself as a Jewish person?
It's more a matter of belonging to something that I respect very highly, especially for its ethics, for its behavior over the centuries, millennia, or what it has given to the world. And it's the place where I feel most at home. I'm very proud of being Jewish. I'm very happy. I believe strongly that I'm very grateful for being Jewish and having all this tradition and all this, I don't know, maybe love is the wrong word, but I feel somehow embedded in it, and I can't imagine being anything else. I don't know. My belief in God, I cannot get beyond the problem of evil. I cannot believe in a God who let happen what happened. I think that explanations about human beings being tested or because somebody ate chazan, as there are rabbis who are saying that because the Holocaust happened because Jews didn't stick to kashrut and so on. I mean, this is just plain nonsense. I'm not an atheist. I'm more of an agnostic. I don't seem to need a God figure. I can live a life as if there were a God watching, but I cannot know. When I was 3 or 4 years old, I asked my grandmother, who happened to be illiterate, I said, "What does it mean to believe?" And this woman said to me, "It means that you don't know." And all my life I've wanted to know. Belief to me is a dangerous thing. It's something that may have a basis and most of the time does not. It's something that makes people angry. It makes some people intolerant. Knowledge to me is much more important. And I know that I am a Jew, that I have behind me millennia of Jews who gave the world the seventh day of rest, who gave the world the Torah, and all that it implies. Keeping the 600 some commandments is not that important to me. It is very important to our children to keep kosher, for example. It's not that important to me. My grandparents on my mother's side kept kosher. When they died, my parents stopped the practice. However, I do love the holidays. I do love going to the synagogue. I feel tremendously moved by the Shema every time because it expresses so well what I feel. But and say in theory I'm a practicing Jew. In practice I'm not so much. As long as the children were at home, or as long as they came to visit us, I would make Shabbat, I would light candles, and it meant an awful lot to me. Just the two of us, we only do it on holidays and so on. We don't go to the synagogue much for other reasons, but that's where I stand. Do you want to say something?
You know, Edith gave a very successful talk in Vienna last month about her life in exile. You know, they have a special academic field now, the research into exile, you see, okay, namely about the Jewish refugees. She gave this talk very successful. At the end of the talk, she said something like this. She's right now, at the request of one of our children, she's now translating this into English because so that the grandchildren can read it. But at the end of her talk, she said something like this. I'll try to translate it. She said, "If I never see New York again, well, I can accept that. But the thought that I'm in Vienna for the last time is very painful to me. Because I come back to it because I must never forget, and I will never forget what happened here and what we have lost here. But I also come back in order to remind myself what I got from here, namely a sense of culture and beauty and of genteel life that influenced me no less than what I derived from Judaism, namely a sense of goodness and a sense of hope and the strength for the future. And that's how she ended, you see. And that's her view of the significance of what her being Jewish means to her. It's a way of it's an outlook that realizes itself in practice, namely a sense of goodness, a sense of decency, a sense of honesty, if you will. You see. And the strength that no matter how terrible life is, one has to go on and face the future and shape the future in spite of it. I think this is what you
Edith, is that
what you
accurate?
said.
Yeah.
That's accurate. Yeah.
But
So
to speak about yourself.
now, Leonard, now it's your turn to speak about yourself and your
Knows me better than I do.
and how you and your the role that Judaism plays in your life and has played in your life and your approach to the divine or the whole question of life. This is a very tough question to ask on one foot, but just to get some sense, some sense what you'd like to convey.
It's a tough question. It's a question that played a role in my mind in various ways at various times, and it is still an open question, not an unfinished question, not a definably answerable question. I remember when I came back from the war, the years after, I don't know how many years after that, I was inwardly furious, terribly angry, and furious. I, in my mind, lashed out at everything, so also my Judaism, so also God, and so on and so forth. I remember that. I never wrote this down or told anyone, you see. I just remembered this. And through my philosophical studies of philosophy, I came to realize that there is no human life, thinking life, without belief, without what Edith refers to as belief, without faith. There are philosophical reasons why I discern that, you see, but I'm not going to go into this. And there is no such thing as belief in something fundamental, okay? Something that in some segments of human culture, if you will, is referred to as God, you see. And there is no question about the circumstance that my Jewish upbringing not only informs my outlook toward life, but it is chosen and constantly chosen by me to be definitive of who I am and what I do. It's not something that coincidentally steers me. It's something that I choose in favor of any other persuasion, so to say, that I know of and that I have encountered in my intellectual life. I, for example, from my own personal view, for example, I dismiss the any significance in the question as to whether there is God or whether there isn't God. See, I don't care about that. I think it's trivial. It's unimportant. The important thing is to make whatever is said to be God's will true by how I live, you see, right? That doesn't make me God, okay? It doesn't confirm God. It is something that simply is, I don't know why, I don't know where, I don't know how, incumbent upon me, you see. Okay? This is the way I feel. Now, I realize that Jews and the Jewish people have done many mistakes in history, in their lives, and so on and so forth. But what is incumbent on them is not thereby vitiated. In fact, in a way, it is confirmed. Only if you confirm what is incumbent upon them can you make judgments about what is a mistake in light of it, and so on and so forth. This is how I feel, insofar as I can articulate it at the spur of the moment.
How does one know God's will? How does one know the will? I want to do as if I can do. You said God's will
Yes,
or the
understand.
will. How does one know
Understand.
How does one know what that is?
Well, there are, fortunately, in a Jewish transition, a Jewish heritage, there is no end of commandments, all right, of rules, of admonitions, of hopes, of proddings, and so on and so forth.
So you're referring to the Torah and the Talmud and the teachings, the various teachings. Okay, I just want to be clear. Yeah.
And just generally, goodness, decency, honesty.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd like now to ask you if you would talk a little bit, Edith, first about your childhood a bit, about your life, when you were born, where you were born, something about your parents, what they did, your grandparents. If you give us some idea of how you came to be who you are, in a sense, your childhood, and your adolescence, and how you came to America.
Yes.
Has this been taped already?
I'm sorry?
Have you already taped this once before?
No, I haven't taped it. I've written it, but I haven't taped it.
Okay, good.
Well, I was born in 1925 in Vienna. My parents were also born in Vienna. My grandparents on my mother's side came from Poland. On my father's side from Czechoslovakia, my grandmother from Moravia, my grandfather from Slovakia. My father and two of his brothers had to go to war in the First World War. His two brothers died. They were all frontline soldiers. And my father was very severely wounded. He was gassed, and he was in explosions and all sorts of trouble. And he was a prisoner of war in Italy and came home from there. Before the war, he was a businessman. He had a good career in business. When he came back, he was wounded. From being gassed, he brought back emphysema. He could never breathe properly again for the rest of his life. He never found a good job anymore. The economic situation in Austria after the First World War kept getting worse and worse. He had various jobs. He was highly respected, but the businesses just went out of business. And it ended up with my parents being relatively poor. In fact, more and more later on, the question of anti-Semitism also entered into it. As a Jew, he could no longer get a good job. In fact, the very last job that he thought he had, and where my mother sold her last piece of good jewelry, and so she could buy him a decent outfit for the job. He arrived on the first day, that was in 1937. The first day, and the boss said, "By the way, you're not a Jew, are you?" And my father said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I can't employ you." That was, from that time on, he was not able to find any work whatsoever. And that was well over a year before Hitler. So, the rest of my family, my mother's brother and sister, and my father's sister, surviving sister, did rather well financially. So we were the poor relations in a way, but I never felt rejected for that reason. We were always loved. I was an only child. We were mostly only children among our acquaintances because the situation was so bad that people couldn't afford to have more than one child. If anybody had two children, it was quite an event, you know. It was a very brave thing to do. So I was the child, you know, for grandparents and so on, and very much loved by the whole family, and felt very much at home with all of them.
What is the names of your parents and your mother's maiden name and the names of your grandparents?
On my mother's side, my grandmother's name was Nettie in German, Neche in Hebrew. And my real grandfather, who died when my mother was 2 years old, it was called galloping consumption in those days. His name was Schwittges. What was his first name? Gerson Joseph Schwittges. I forgot. My grandmother came from where your father comes from. From
Tarnów.
Tarnów, yeah. Tarnów. My grandfather from Brody. On my father's side, my grandmother's name was Charlotte Schönhauser, and she came from Uherski Brod, Ungarisch Brod in Moravia. And her husband's name, my grandfather's name, was Jonas Schwarz. And he was born in Sobotist, it's called. Sobotist in Slovakia, and apparently moved fairly young to the area of in southwestern Hungary.
What did your grandparents do for a living?
Well, my grandfather died, my mother's side died very young. He was also a businessman. He left my grandmother destitute with 2 small children. My other grandfather, I know very little about him, in fact nothing, next to nothing.
Well, you know his various professions during his life.
Well, my father's father, yes, well he started...
My father's father.
Yeah, he was a carver of meerschaum pipes.
And at the same time...
And a cantor. And my grandmother, his wife, was a teacher of handicrafts. And she in a girls' school, and she was terrific with her hands. She could do anything from teapot to big rugs. I still have rugs in her pictures. She was well educated. My mother's mother, for various reasons, one was that she had a bad leg that happened when she was born, was never sent to school. And when she was 12 years old, she was sent to Vienna to stay with her older sister. Married sister who had 4 children, but because of her leg, she was put into a hospital for 2 years. And eventually, she walked rather well with a slight limp, but somehow nobody ever thought of teaching her how to read and write. Before she died, I was teaching her how to read. She was a highly intelligent woman, very musical. She loved Beethoven, was her favorite. And whenever she had any money at all, she sent her 2 children to a concert. And she had a tremendous imagination. She would tell me stories that she would make up on the spur of the moment. I wish that I could have remembered them, or you know, I just remember lying with her in bed and she telling me one story after another. It was written no place that nobody had ever heard of, and nobody ever heard except I did.
She fostered your imagination.
Yeah. My other grandmother also told me stories, but she was much more literate, and so she would tell me, she would recite poems for me, or she would make up stories that had a moral to them.
How did your parents meet?
My parents met in the Arbeiter-Turnverein, which means that...
a workers' after-hour gym.
A gym.
They were both exercising or working out, or
yeah, working out, and that's where they met.
It's just like a social club too.
Yeah.
Can you give me the street address where you lived in Vienna?
Yes, I lived in the 2nd district, which was mostly Jewish
at that time.
At that time, there's still a number of Jews there now, but also gypsies. Anyway, it was Adamberger Gasse. And it was number 5.
And did you stay there the whole time you lived in Vienna? That was your...
Yes.
It was an apartment house?
It was an apartment house, yes. We had a small apartment there. In fact, we lived with my mother's parents because my father had to give up the apartment that they had before I was born because he lost his jobs.
What was the Jewish atmosphere? How were you brought up in terms of Jewish life? Was there a synagogue you went to?
Well, I never went to the synagogue really, but well, as long as my grandparents were alive, we kept kosher. I knew all the rules, and my grandmother was very proud because when she bought a chicken, I knew exactly what had to be taken out from the neck. Well, it wasn't Jewish, and it wasn't kosher, and so on. And she was the one that did the cooking, and she baked the challah on Fridays and so on. My grandparents went to synagogue. My grandfather would get his shave on Friday. All week long he would be unshaven on Friday. He would go get his shave. I think they both went to mikveh, they went to synagogue and so on. My mother went on high holidays for Yizkor and so on.
But your grandparents didn't take you to synagogue?
No. I would on the high holidays I would hang around, because they were there such a long time. And
And where did you go to school? Can you name the different schools you went to in Vienna?
I went to 2 schools. I went to the local elementary school around the corner from where I lived, and which was the first 4 years, and then I passed a entrance exam to the Jewish gymnasium in Vienna. It's called Chayes Real Gymnasium. And this is where I went till Hitler, till after Kristallnacht, when my parents wouldn't let me out of the house anymore, wouldn't let me, it was about a mile away, and they wouldn't let me walk that distance anymore. So,
what was the curriculum like at this Jewish gymnasium? Was it a very special school?
Yes, it was. We had German. We were 10 years old, right? The classes,
One enters it at age 10.
And you had to take an exam to get in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And when we started out, we had 56 kids in the class. It shrank in time because the school was rather rigorous, but it was a big class. But we had, let me see if I can think of all the subjects: German and math and Hebrew, modern Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, Latin, history, geography, art,
Drawing.
music.
Drawing and music.
Yeah.
Drawing and music.
Did I mention everything? I think so.
What was the Jewish component of this school?
Well, it was
The Hebrew.
Hebrew?
Hebrew and Bible. We started with
Bible.
Chumash from the beginning and read the whole.
What was there a Jewish content in terms of belief system that they wanted you to go to shul or Orthodox, conservative, or
you have to consider the fact that Austria, although mainly Catholic, also required the Jewish children to go to services. And so we all had to go on Saturday afternoon. There was a children's
Special services
children's service.
on Saturday afternoon.
You had to get a card stamped or whatever.
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah. So
is the state insisted on this?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
If you're Jewish or whatever religion, you're going to go pray.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And within the school, it was very Zionist oriented, and that's why we had modern Hebrew. And the history that was taught was tinged a bit with more truth than that was taught in Austrian schools. They would say, well, this is what it says in the textbook, but we also had all Jewish teachers who were unusually well qualified because they were Jews who, as Jews, could not find work in any other school, even though they had a PhD and they taught.
Could you recall some of your teachers, the names and what they taught?
Oh yeah.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Our Klausner, we call it
Homeroom
teacher was Gabe. What was his first
Gabe.
What was his first name?
Samuel Milo.
Milo Gabe. He was actually a banker, but he taught us Latin. He also taught us German. It was very, very good. Very strict, very good.
Very strict, excellent. He taught German and
Latin.
and German literature and Latin.
Yeah. Did I mention Latin before? Yes, I did. No? Yeah. Anyway, we had that from the very beginning.
And what became of him?
In time, he became a professor of classics, namely Latin and Greek philosophy.
Where?
In Caracas, Venezuela.
Went wherever we could,
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So who else did you have?
Then we had
Another one who got to be very famous
is
Löwenfeld.
Victor Löwenfeld.
Victor Löwenfeld. Sure.
You
have you
heard of
Of
him?
course.
How come?
Art.
Yeah. He's a very famous writer on art. He's
Yeah,
an exile. We
yeah.
call him a refugee.
He was-
Sure, I have his books.
Art education.
Yeah,
He was
yeah,
our
yeah. I
te-
have
he
his
was our
books.
teacher.
What?
Yeah.
He was your teacher?
No, I have his books. I sell
Yeah,
his
his books.
books.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
Sure, he was your teacher, art teacher.
Isn't one of your drawings in one of his books?
Yeah, one of my drawings is in one of his books.
Art education. He came
Yeah,
over. I
he's
think he
very
worked in New
talented,
York.
you know.
He worked in New York, I think.
No,
later.
in California.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
Where?
In California. He was in California.
Excuse me, he was in Pennsylvania.
Oh, his
Yeah,
brother was in California.
His brother was in
I'm sorry.
California.
Yeah,
His brother taught us singing.
yeah.
What was his brother's name? Do you remember?
Bertold Löwenfeld. He also had a PhD, and he taught singing at our gymnasium as a pastime, as a secondary. His profession was education of the blind. Vienna had a highly famous, internationally famous Institute for the Blind, founded by Jews in the 1890s. And he, in time, this Bertold Löwenfeld was employed there, was one of the directors there. Not the main director, but one of the and he in time became commissioner for the blind of the state of California.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on. Who else do you remember?
Who else do we remember? There was Khan, who taught us.
Kahn,
yeah.
the biology teacher, Susanne Kahn.
Yeah.
Yeah. She.
Rabinovich.
Edith and Professor Kahn met at a concert in New York one
The
time.
Carnegie Hall, yeah, when you were
What
overseas.
was she doing?
Well, I don't know what she was doing, but
What was her profession here in the
I
States?
have no idea.
You
We
don't
just
know.
had a couple of minutes, and she
Yeah.
asked, and I said that I married this guy here, and she said, an intelligent boy, but so bad, naughty. She didn't-
Apparently, you both went to the same school.
Oh yeah, we were in the same class.
Same class.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, who else?
Who else was there? Rabinovich.
Who else? There was
Rabinovich,
one of our Hebrew teachers was
Weinstock.
Weinstein, Dr. Weinstein.
And Dr. Weinstock.
He became a rabbi in London afterward.
Yeah. It was Weinstock also who taught us modern Hebrew, I think. And,
Oh, excuse me, Weinstock
Yeah.
became a rabbi in London. What happened to Weinstein? I don't know. He also was a
yeah,
Hebrew
it was
teacher.
Exelbiert who taught us.
What is it?
Exelbiert.
Exelbiert,
taught us
geography, I believe. Yeah. You saw him in London
at
one
the American
time.
consulate, yeah.
At
I was
the
getting a
consulate,
visa
yeah.
for the States, yeah. At the
Yeah.
same time I did.
Yeah.
Um,
Two of our professors were killed in the Holocaust. Kofler and Kestenbaum.
Oh yeah.
Kestenbaum. Kestenbaum was a pioneer in the teaching of modern Hebrew. He was especially well liked. We didn't have Kestenbaum, but when one of our Hebrew teachers was sick, he was there for a couple of weeks. So we know him, but he was loved in the school.
Yeah, at the upper grades.
What years exactly were you in the school? From 19...
Let's see.
35 to 38.
35, yeah.
3 years of your lives.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But it changed your life.
Oh yes.
You got a fantastic...
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I missed 2 years of school because of immigration, and I didn't lose any time when I got into high school. Okay?
So you're in Vienna, it's the 1930s.
Yeah,
The Anschluss has happened.
in 38.
How did your family get out? What happened? What happened to you?
Okay. Do you want me to tell?
Yeah, then we'll go, yeah.
All right. I have to go back a little bit. My father's uncle, my grandfather's brother, emigrated to the United States before World War I, around 1900. And he came to visit just before I think 1912 or 1913, and he told his nephew, said, whenever you need anything, let me know. He lived in Philadelphia. He had a hat business there, as so many others. Philadelphia was famous for hats. And so when Hitler came, my father said, well, of course, Uncle so-and-so, I forget his name now, is going to send us an affidavit. And just to make sure, my father went right away to the American consulate to register. And that was a good thing, because whoever registered first got out first. It so happened that he wrote to his uncle a number of times. He never got a response. He knew that his uncle had, I think, 3 sons. None of them answered. My mother also had an uncle in New York. On her mother's side, brother had immigrated to the States, and she wrote to Uncle Karlman, and he wrote back. He said, I'm sorry, we don't have enough money. If you ever come to the States, come and visit us. And we did, but we never felt very welcome there. So there we were. Then my uncle, my mother's brother, worked for an American company in Vienna, and this company brought him to the States very quickly. I think in September of '38, he and his wife had already emigrated. He said, no problem, I'll get my boss to send you an affidavit. The boss didn't want to send an affidavit. He got out my aunt's, his wife's brother, and he says, I've done my share, that's enough, I don't want to do anymore. It cost 67 cents in filling out a form. Okay, that's all it was. My uncle tried and tried again, my aunt tried, no go. So there we were stuck. No chances. We didn't have enough money to buy our way to Shanghai or to Cuba or anything like that. People with money who still had some money left could do that. We couldn't. Then came the children's transports to England. So he said, look, I'll go. I'll try and get you a job there as a housemaid or as a butler or something. My father went to learn how to buttle at the Kultusgemeinde, the Jewish community. They had courses there to retrain people for different jobs, and they said that they can get butlers' jobs in England. And I tried when I got to England, but I never found any jobs for them. I said, anyway, at least you get out. So I left for England in May of 1939, and that was by a fluke. My maiden name was Edith Schwartz. There was another girl in Vienna by the same name, about the same age. They put me on the list by mistake. And that's how I got to England. When I got there, the people that had asked for the other girl didn't want me. And so they just left me standing there. But that's a long story that I don't want to go into here. Anyway, that's how I got to England.
What happened to the other Edith Schwartz?
I don't know what happened to her, but maybe 3-4 years back, they opened up a research facility in Vienna. And the very first person I looked up was this one here, and she was not on the list of people killed. So I felt very good about that, because all these years I've been wondering, did I get out and have somebody else killed in my stead? You know, it was not a good feeling. I mean, you speak of survivor guilt. You can imagine I had quite a bit of that because of the situation. Anyway, so there I was in England. Finally, they found a family for me, but that's another story. I won't go into that now. And one of the first things I did was to sit down and write a letter to my uncle. I loved my uncle. We were very close. And all the things that my parents or I were never able to write from Vienna because of censorship, I told him about. He didn't read it in the paper here, surely. He knew nothing about it. But I told him what the situation was. I told him what happened in Kristallnacht, about all the other atrocities that were committed against the Jews since he left and so on. I found out later on, he wrote to me a few months later, that he took that letter as a last resort to his boss. Gave him the letter. The boss sat down, didn't say a word. My uncle, just as a last chance, brought along a form again. He took the form and he filled out the form. And my parents had an affidavit to come to the States.
And they got out?
They got out. Yeah. So much is coincidence. So much was coincidence in those days, you know.
Their number was still held and they could
Yeah,
still
well,
get
their number,
out.
they had an early number, you see.
And if you had the affidavit, they would still hold that number for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the number was there. They were registered. And they were both born in Vienna. If they'd been born in Poland or, God forbid, in Hungary, you can forget about it.
So your letter
Yeah.
made the difference.
Yeah. I was only 13. I mean, still, I was able to write a decent letter, apparently.
And then your parents came to London?
No, they came straight...
Directly to America?
To America, yes. And in time, a few months later, half a year later, I joined them. Because they let children come out, you know, let families be reunited.
Where did your family settle in?
In New York.
Where? Washington Heights?
Washington Heights. No, my uncle was in Washington Heights. We were, let me see, first we had a room on 2nd Avenue about between 12th and 13th Streets, which the Hayes paid for. It was in a rooming house of ill repute. I didn't know it at the time, but I was wondering why my mother always scrubbed the bathtub so carefully before any of us went in there and sprayed the toilet. Later on I found out why that was. And then we tried to share an apartment in Washington Heights with another family, and that didn't work out, and eventually we ended up in the Bronx, on 170th Street.
Grand Concourse, Bronx?
Not far from Concourse, on 170th Street.
And what did your father and mother do for a living once they came over here?
My father didn't get a job till after the war started, and all he did was some very menial job in a factory. But then he was fairly ill anyway. My mother was taught how to sew lace on ladies' slips in a factory, and she worked on that until she retired. It was piecework. It was very hard. She had to work like crazy, and she made very little money, but we managed somehow. I earned whatever I could, you know, between semesters in school and after school jobs and so on.
Okay, we have some pictures here. I'm going to ask you to please identify the people in these pictures.
Yeah, you better do that. That's your...
Can you identify the
Yeah.
people in this first... Yeah, let me hold it up close.
Well, this is
Yeah.
my father's family. This is my grandfather. This is my grandmother. There are 6 children. In order of age, this one was first, this one was second, this one was third, and that's my father.
And his name, again?
His name, Joseph. Joseph.
And who's that little young man sitting there?
This little fellow, about 5 years old or so, is the first grandchild of my grandparents, namely the son of this aunt here.
Okay. What is the next picture?
Again, my father's family. This is my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Same as
Okay.
as this here.
Yeah.
This, my grandfather is, I think, the third of 5 sons of my great-grandfather, and this is the second son. You can see, please notice, he's dressed like a very snappy gentleman of the 1880s, with this sort of hat and spats here on the shoe, over the shoes, you see, and the white pants. And my grandfather, on the other hand, his brother, wears a kittel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a yami.
Mm-hmm.
And the great-grandfather, a strammel.
Mm-hmm.
And the kittel, of course. And there's a story to be told about this picture. Photography was fairly new at that time. Not very new, but fairly new. And some Orthodox Jews, very observant Jews, didn't take to it very easily. So my great-grandfather didn't want to have his picture taken. There's something atavistic. He didn't want to have his picture taken, so he closed his eyes. And the photographer tricked him and said, "Okay, it's over." And he opened his eyes, and now he took a picture, see. This is my grandfather a few years earlier, about 10 years earlier. In those days, they made wooing pictures, okay? This was an arranged marriage, okay? This was an arranged marriage. Here's a girl born in Tarnów, but she lived in Vienna, and she was about 17 years old. You can see they show her with family jewels there, long hair, waist pinched, and this is a wooing picture of the bridegroom, of the prospective bridegroom, my grandfather. Look, his pants are not ironed. He's very awkward. He doesn't know what to do, you see. But it turned out to be a very good marriage. And this is my mother's family now.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Also before the First World War, my grandfather was married twice. There are 10 children from the first marriage, and there are 4 children from the second marriage, plus 1 from his second wife's first marriage, you see, whom he considered as if it were his own. So in altogether there were 15 children. 1 died young, so there are only 14 of them on this picture here. 1913, this was taken on the occasion of the wedding of his youngest child from his first marriage. My aunt Elsa, who later on was in the ghetto of Lodz, where she also died, and of his children, of his 14 children who survived him, all but 2 were killed in the Holocaust. This, you see, next to the father is, of course, the oldest daughter, very possessive, you see, and next to her, the second oldest daughter. Does the name Shlomo Avineri mean anything to you? Okay, that my Aunt Loretta is the grandmother of Shlomo, you see. And this is his grandfather here. And my mother is here, 14 years old here. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And this youngest one, my Aunt Peppy, Josephine, was 8 years old at that time. She and my mother are the only two who survived the Holocaust. My mother, because we emigrated to the United States, and she, because she survived Majdanek with her little boy. They both survived the death camp of Majdanek. These are Edith's grandparents here.
Uh-huh.
The real grandfather and grandmother.
Uh-huh.
And here is that uncle who later on would get the family out to the United States.
The uncle's name we don't quite remember, right? Did you?
Yeah.
Huh?
This uncle, that's Bernard.
Bernard.
Yeah.
And give me again your mother's and their names.
My mother.
Yeah, from this picture.
The mother, wasn't born yet.
Oh, this is
Her
the
grandmother wasn't born yet.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Excuse me, her mother
Who are
wasn't
these?
born yet.
Give me the names of these people again.
Okay, this is Gerson Josef Schwitkes. This is Nettie Schwitkes. And this is Bernhard Schwitkes in the States. He was Bernard Swiss.
Okay. And who are in these remaining pictures?
These are the parents, the engagement picture of Edith's parents. Okay.
Uh-huh.
That was in the middle of the First World War, about 1916. He is a corporal, of the infantry of the Austro-Hungarian army.
Okay.
And this is my mother-in-law.
All right.
And this is, again, shortly before the First World War, about 1913, 1914 even. These are the grandparents, the other grandparents of Edith's. He is the one who was a carver of pipes and cantor in his youth. And this is the very cultured lady with the needlework.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
That's my father then.
Yeah. And there's one more picture.
One more picture, the engagement picture of my parents the year after the First World War ended, 1919. This is my mother, this is my father.
Uh-huh. Okay.
She was 20 years old at that time.
Uh-huh.